This week in the O.J. Simpson trial, the prosecution suffers yet another major setback. Evidence linking O.J. Simpson's Bronco to Ron Goldman's bloody clothes is excluded by Judge Lance Ito. I'm Roger Cossack, and this is OJ25.
All right, Ms. Clark, the people may call the next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. People call Mr. Douglas Diedrich.
Should we disclose the motive and method of the truth and loving God?
I do.
Please have a seat and witness.
When you make an examination of hairs or fibers and you attempt to compare them to see if they are the same or similar composition, do you ever use the term match?
Well, sure, we use the term match. Mr. Cochran.
Your Honor, I stand before you today in a very, very serious, perhaps the most egregious, outrageous thing that's happened in this trial thus far. This report basically summarizes his so-called rareness of the alleged beige fiber found in Bronco vehicles. And I'd like to quote from a wise judge on this very issue. Page 29, 129. Quote, "If it comes to pass that there are reports or that conclusions were reached and there was a deliberate manipulation of the process and an instruction to the witness not to prepare a report to avoid discovery, then those witnesses will not testify, and that is going to be the sanction. That was an order that I made early this year." Now, Your Honor, that might sound familiar. That order, those words came from Your Honor's mouth.
They've had the reports concerning Mr. Diedrich's conclusion about the fact that the Bronco carpet fiber from O.J. Simpson's car matches those fibers on the Rockingham glove and the knit cap for at least 6 months, if not more. They've known where to find the information concerning the production of that carpet type for at least 6 months, if not more, by their own admission. And now they're complaining that they didn't do further or better research, and that's not our fault.
We were able to introduce evidence that the Bronco fibers found on Ron Goldman's shirt, I believe the watch cap found at the Bundy scene, and on the Rockingham glove were consistent with fibers found in the Bronco.
This is about Mr. Simpson. This is about whether Mr. Simpson can receive a fair trial. This is about a trial that started on September 26th, Your Honor, and you've gone out of your way to try to give us a fair trial. And to have this occur when we know we're coming to the end, when you have made it abundantly clear you don't want delays, that you want to move this on, when you warned all of us there'll be preclusion if we don't comply with the laws. And we have seen the sanctimonious, pious posturing by the prosecution so many times in this case.
I really believed, and I think people who watched the trial believe that he believed in his client's innocence.
We want to go ahead with this case and finish this case. This jury deserves nothing less. It's not their problem. It's the prosecution's problem when they intentionally do this, Your Honor, and they have to be held accountable. And the way you hold them accountable is to preclude this witness, or at minimum, preclude those things where they violated the discovery laws of the state of California. And there's no other remedy otherwise. Nothing else helps us, because you don't want to wait 2 or 3 months for us to get up to speed where we would have been. Do you?
The television coverage had a kind of a seductive effect on Judge Ito at times.
That's a dude doing the OJ case, right?
I hear about Judge Ito on the TV quite a bit.
You know, he's a very popular figure right now.
I do think things got out of control in the courtroom at times.
This report, Your Honor, is entitled The Search for the Source, Carpet Fibers, etc., the O.J. Simpson case. And if you look at this report, Your Honor, on every page, they're talking about O.J. Simpson. Throughout this report, never before has there been a defendant who's been subjected to every law enforcement helping in the case ever in the history of the state. We have to ask for things because we're fighting the power of the government and a man who's innocent. That's what we're trying to do here. So let's make that clear. But I'm not, you've heard all that. And they can cite you cases as they oftentimes do that are never on point. But I'm going to cite you Ito on the law. Ito on the law in this case. And it says, if it comes to pass that there are reports or conclusions which are reached and there was a deliberate manipulation of the process, there'll be preclusion.
The objection to the content of the report prepared by Mr. Diedrich regarding the source and rarity of the carpet fiber, that objection will be sustained. The prosecution will be precluded from presenting any evidence that is contained in the report.
And when you use the term match, what do you mean?
When I say match, we cannot say with absolute certainty that a fiber originated from a particular fabric. It's not possible to do that. Nor do we say that a hair that's found at a crime scene or in a proficiency test originated absolutely from that individual. But the most an examiner can say about that hair is that hair could have come from that person.
Now, the word match, as used in appellate decisions and used once on this page, is a dangerous word because of the connotations to a layman. When you say a perfect match, you may be talking about a male and a female who are not identical, but who fit together well. The word match normally is interpreted to mean identity. I don't believe it's fair to have him on the one hand tell the jury, I can't say that it came from this source, and on the other hand, that's a match. It's confusing, and it runs the risk that one or more jurors will interpret that as a positive identification when it is no such thing and never can be in hair and fiber technology.
He'll never say that the match indicates identity, but unless he finds a match, he cannot even say it could have come from the head of Mr. Simpson or the head of Nicole Brown or Ronald Goldman. That's the issue. And counsel is confused between the terminology that permits the conclusion ultimately to be reached that he just read to you and the finding and the observations that are made that lead to that conclusion.
The definition of the word match is as follows: one that is exactly like another, one that forms an exact pair with another, an exact counterpart. So that terminology is too close to, that terminology overstates the power of this evidence, and the court's previous ruling will stand.
The portion that was suppressed was the discriminatory details showing how closely those fibers were in terms of being a match. So we were able to obtain the opinion that the fibers were consistent, but we couldn't get into the details about how consistent.
O.J. Simpson left evidence like E.T. left Reese's Pieces. Everywhere he went, he left evidence.
Let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Diedrich, would you resume the witness stand, please?
In your examination of the hairs collected from the evidence items in this case, sir, did you find any hairs that exhibited the same microscopic characteristics as those of Nicole Brown?
I did. These hairs were found on the glove identified as originating from the Rockingham location, a glove found at the Bundy location, as well as from the knit hat that was recovered at the Bundy location. Hairs that exhibited the same characteristics as those of Nicole Brown Simpson were also found on the pants and shirt of Ronald Goldman. The hairs from Ronald Goldman's shirt, there were about 35 forcibly removed hairs exhibiting the same microscopic characteristics as those of Nicole Brown Simpson.
If you would assume the following events, sir, that the killer pulled back Nicole's head with his hand, with his left hand, in order to slit her throat with his right hand, and then went over to Ron Goldman for a final attack, touching him in the process with the hand that held Nicole's hair by the head. Could that account for the hairs that you found on Ron Goldman's shirt?
Yes, that could account for the presence of those hairs.
Did you find any hairs that you found to exhibit the same microscopic characteristics as those of Ronald Goldman?
I did.
And again, were those head hairs?
They were.
And where did you find those head hairs, sir?
Well, there were hairs that were recovered from Mr. Goldman's shirt, and there were also hairs recovered from the Rockingham glove.
So in spite of all the baloney that was being floated, the DNA evidence was proved it beyond any doubt in my mind.
If the attacker is wearing that Rockingham glove and holding the knife in his right hand, which is the Rockingham glove hand, and stabs Ron Goldman in the head and neck area, are those circumstances consistent with the cut and damaged hairs that you found that were collected from the Rockingham glove?
Objection, foundation, speculation.
Yes, they would be consistent with that.
In your examination of the hairs collected from the evidence in this case, did you find any hairs that were not of Caucasian origin?
I did.
And of what origin were they?
From a black individual.
Were they head hairs?
Yes, and limb hairs.
By the time we got to the DNA evidence, we were all like, without question, he did it.
From which items of evidence were they collected?
Well, the head hairs were identified as coming from a cap, from a Bronco, a knit hat that was recovered from the crime scene, a Ronald Goldman shirt, and those were the items.
Okay. The only thing that was missing really was, hello, my name is, name tag left at the crime scene. I mean, it's common sense.
Well, these hairs exhibited the same microscopic characteristics and accordingly could have originated from the defendant.
O.J. Simpson left evidence like E.T. left Reese's Pieces. Everywhere he went, he left evidence.
Mr. Diedrich, I want to ask you, with respect to certain items that have been referred to in your testimony, whether these assertions are acceptable from your point of view. In other words, whether or not you find them to be true. First of all, as to hair found in the Bronco, would you agree that no hair consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
Would you also agree that no hair consistent with Ronald Goldman was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
With respect to both gloves, would you agree that no hair consistent with O.J. Simpson, as you have used that term, consistent, was on the Bundy glove?
That's right.
Is it not also true that no hair consistent with O.J. Simpson was found on the Rockingham glove?
That's correct.
As to the socks that you examined, would you agree that no hair consistent with Ronald Goldman was found on the sock?
I would.
And that no hair consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson was found on the sock?
That's correct.
Would you also agree that the fact that 35 hairs with roots were found on Ronald Goldman's shirt area, I believe, is that where the bulk of them were located?
That's right.
Strongly suggests to you that those hairs were pulled out by an attacker before he attacked Goldman, and that the directionality goes from Nicole Brown Simpson to Ronald Goldman.
It appears from that evidence, yes.
Would you also agree that you found in the hairs in the hat what appeared to be an indication of dandruff on the cuticle?
No, there was dandruff in the known hairs.
Yes.
Right, in the known sample.
I'm sorry, in the known sample.
That's right.
Is it not true that you found no indication of dandruff in the knit hat?
That's right.
Or in any of the hairs that you have said could have come from O.J. Simpson?
That's right. That's correct.
In examining those hair samples of inmates who've been incarcerated for a month or more, have you noticed anything about their hair condition as a result of the incarceration?
Well, it may change, and dandruff is one good example of that.
We got a court order to get his hair. And I went with a criminalist over to the jail, and I got his hair that they wanted because we had hair as evidence that was similar to his, by the way, in the cap, the stocking cap. I think they need 40 follicles or something. And he said, you know, I'll give you this and cooperate. I just don't want you throwing anything on the table, you know, that could clear me. This type of thing. This is his attitude. Typical sociopath. I'm in charge. Don't throw it on the table. You just take care of me, you know, do the right thing type.
People call Ms. Denise Lewis. All right, after you got done initialing and itemizing by number all of the items for Nicole Brown from the manila envelope, what did you do?
Once again, I looked at the terry cloth towels, make sure there isn't any trace evidence that was left. Nothing was observed. The cloth towels and my gloves were discarded.
Now, when I say hair and trace, tell us what that means.
Hair, the obvious, different hair. Trace, you've got soil debris. You also have carpet fibers. We've got various ways of collecting the items. First, when we observe the items, which we can use opaque lighting for observation of hair and trace evidence. Once we discover it, we're going to use gloved hands, gather the evidence, putting it either into a plastic container or a paper bindle, or we also use sticky lifts or a tape-type lift to gather the evidence.
So after you put the decedent's hair kit and the other envelopes into the white frozen envelope, what did you do next?
I sealed the envelope.
And then what'd you do?
The envelope was placed into the freezer that is inside our supply room area, which is also a secured area.
Now, you indicated, I believe, also that you changed your gloves and threw away the terry cloth towels.
Yes.
Was there any paper down on that table?
I then placed paper down for the next stage of the itemization.
Packages that had the hair samples and other swatches, those were unsealed.
Yes.
It's not unusual at all when you take an article of clothing out to look at it that you're going to wind up with something on that paper that needs to be preserved.
Actually, it's not as common as you're making it sound. If you're careful, you can keep things from falling down.
Okay, but there were, in many of the items that you examined here, there were extra bindles that had been put in the bags because items had come off of the evidence and someone had put them in a bindle to make sure they stayed with the evidence.
Yes.
Would you agree that in the last 50 years there's been very little change in the technology with respect to hair and trace evidence?
I've only been involved for the last 5 years, but there has been very little change over the last 5 years, I can say that much.
And there have been some attempts to improve the ability to discriminate with hairs and fibers that really have not been very successful.
Yes.
It's not, certainly the amount of resources that have been devoted to hair and fiber are far less than such things as DNA, for instance. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, yes.
Same thing with other forensic areas like serology. There's been a lot more in the way of technological development with those fields than there has been in hair and trace.
Yes.
Is there any standard in the field of hair analysis for what characteristics have to be present to say that two things are consistent?
Not that I'm aware of.
So one examiner may have different criteria in terms of what specific characteristics or the number of characteristics that they require before they say something is consistent than another examiner.
That may be correct.
Ms. Clark.
Would you expect to find hairs from an attacker on clothing of the victim if there was no bodily physical contact between them?
Object and ask for sidebar.
I wouldn't expect to find anything if there was no physical contact. It's possible that hairs may be blown off of clothing, but it's more reasonable to believe that the actual physical contact results in the transfer.
All right, is there anything further from the people?
At this time, subject to the receipt of the people's exhibits into evidence, the people rest.
I believe that what we should ask the jury is, has the prosecution proven its case or not proven its case? And proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. I think in this case, when the prosecution rested, that's really was their case. And at that point, the jury had to make that decision. Was it proven or not proven beyond a reasonable doubt?
It was a huge relief when the prosecution ended its case because it was months and months and months and months. And so we knew the end was near.
Mr. Cochran, he's been mouthing off for the past 12 months. Okay, Johnny. All right. You know, these are baseless allegations of conspiracies and contamination and the like. Now's the time to put up or shut up.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
As OJ25 continues, lead prosecutor Marcia Clark rests the state's case. After 105 days of testimony, the jury has heard from 58 witnesses who describe the motive, means, and opportunity for O.J. Simpson to have murdered Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman.
When we come back to this jury and we put it all together, there will be a complete picture that will be simply overwhelming and undeniable of the defendant's guilt.
The prosecution's case can be broken down into three key phases. The motive of domestic violence.
Hey man, you hit her.
And started yelling, he's gonna kill me, he's gonna kill me.
The timeline to prove O.J. Simpson had the opportunity to murder Ron and Nicole.
An hour and 10 minutes of time in which his whereabouts are unaccounted for.
And the overwhelming blood and DNA evidence linking O.J. to the murders.
I saw a female victim lying in a pool of blood. On the other side of her, I saw the male victim.
We asked ourselves, can the defendant be excluded? And over and over and over again, the answer was no.
Here's a review of the three elements of the prosecution's case.
These opening statements are normally given by the attorneys to sort of give you an overall view of the evidence that they intend to present. It's to give you a roadmap, so to speak, as to how to evaluate the evidence.
Did O.J. Simpson really kill Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman? Well, finally, ladies and gentlemen, I am here in front of you this morning to answer that question. And we'll answer that question from the witness stand.
OJ made a remark to me. He said that he didn't think that he was a batterer. And I explained to him, I said, hey man, you hit her. She's got marks. You're a batterer.
There was an incident where Nicole was on the phone with the police. I guess it was the police, and I came in, and it was an argument going on.
Hello?
She was a female Caucasian, blonde hair. She was wearing a bra only as an upper garment, and she had on a dark, I believe it was a dark, lightweight sweatpants or night pajama bottoms, and started yelling, he's gonna kill me, he's gonna kill me. Who is gonna kill you? She said, OJ. She said that OJ had slapped her, hit her with his fist, and kicked her. She said, you've been out here 8 times, you never do anything about him. And she says, I want him arrested, I want my kids back, I want to go in the house.
Did he deny causing those injuries?
No, he did not.
Did he admit causing those injuries?
Yes, he did. He told me that he was sorry for what he did to Nicole and that he didn't mean to harm her in any way and that he would seek counseling with her.
We will expose in this trial and show to you in this trial that other face, the one that Nicole Brown encountered almost every day of her adult life. The face of a batterer, a wife beater, an abuser, a controller. You'll see the face of Ron's and Nicole's murderer.
Okay, what is he doing there?
He just drove up again.
He just drove up.
over.
Okay, wait a minute. What kind of car is he in?
He's in a white Bronco, but first of all, he broke the back door down to get in.
Okay, wait a minute. What's your name?
Nicole Simpson.
Okay, is he the sportscaster or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay, and what is he? Wait a minute. We're sending the police. What is he doing? Is he threatening you?
He's been going nuts.
He kind of jokingly just said, you know, to be honest, Ship, that's what he called me, Ship. He said, I've had some dreams of killing her.
I felt OJ had done the murders, you know, right after the first time when I talked to him at Rockingham. He asked me questions, you know, about DNA, how long does it take DNA to come back. And I just felt, you know, deep down in my heart and soul that he had done it.
The motive for the prosecution, domestic violence. Why else would O.J. Simpson kill anybody? It made sense to some extent. You had Ron Shipp come in, and you had Denise Brown.
O.J. grabbed Nicole's crotch and said, "This is where babies come from, and this belongs to me." And Nicole just sort of wrote it off like it was nothing, like, you know, like she was used to that kind of treatment.
And when he grabbed her in the crotch, were there people around?
Oh, yeah, the bar was packed.
Strangers?
Yeah. Yeah, he was talking to the strangers. He loves the attention. He loves it.
Did the defendant appear mad or angry or upset when he grabbed his sister's crotch and made these statements in front of these strangers?
No, he wasn't angry. It was his. It was like, this belongs to me, this is mine. He wasn't angry when he said it, he just made it a point. He wanted it to be known.
And while you were talking, did you say something to the defendant?
Yes, I did.
What did you say to him?
I told him he took Nicole for granted, and he blew up. He got extremely upset. He started yelling at me, "I'll take her for granted. I do everything for her. I give her everything." And he continued. And then a whole fight broke out, and pictures started flying off the walls. Clothes started flying. He ran upstairs, and grabbed Nicole, told her to get out of his house, wanted us all out of his house. Picked her up, threw her against a wall. Picked her up, threw her out of the house. She ended up on her. She ended up falling. She ended up on her elbows and on her butt. We were all sitting there screaming and crying. And then he grabbed me and threw me out of the house.
Denise testified that there was a fight and Simpson threw her out. But you don't think fights actually lead up to somebody killing you. It's like that was so unfathomable. It's like, this doesn't happen.
The prosecution had all of their eggs in that basket in terms of motive. The problem was the defense. They were able to bring up Shipp and Denise's drinking. They attacked those witnesses' credibility outside of what they witnessed. And it was done masterfully. At the end of the day, there are now questions in jurors' mind. Why would O.J. Simpson kill anybody? He had the best life.
We can discern from that. We can see a motive. We can see his motive for killing his ex-wife. And he killed Ron Goldman for another reason. He killed Ron Goldman because he got in the way.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
This has to do with the timing of the events that happened that night. You're going to hear a lot of talking about that throughout this trial. I think I can guarantee that.
In this case, it was so important for the prosecution to establish that O.J. had the time to kill Ron and Nicole.
With respect to the timing, The evidence will show that on the night of June the 12th, 1994, the defendant had an hour and 10 minutes of time in which his whereabouts are unaccounted for. Approximately what time was it when you got your food?
9:25, 9:26. I looked and said, I'll eat in my room.
At approximately 9:50 p.m., Ron Goldman left the restaurant, and his friends at the restaurant never again saw him alive. Do you recognize what we're showing you here?
Yes.
What is it?
It's Ron's shirt and pants. Yeah.
Did Ron say something to you?
Yeah, he told me he was going to drop the glasses off at Nicole's.
Did you see him leave the restaurant at some point?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall about what time it was?
He left at about 10 minutes to 10.
At 10:15, a dog is heard barking that the evidence will show was Nicole's dog, which fixes the time at which the murder occurred. Was there something unusual about that dog barking that drew your attention to it?
It was it was fairly persistent. It was at a significant pitch, and as you may recall, I described it at the time as a plaintive wail.
As they went south on Bundy, the dog started pulling harder and harder until they got to the location of 875 South Bundy. And there at the pathway leading up to that home, the dog stopped. And the dog looked up the pathway, and that made Sukru look up the pathway. And there he saw a sight that he'll never forget. He saw the body of Nicole Brown lying at the foot of the steps in a pool of blood.
I turned to my wife and said that there was a dead person there. We decided to call 911.
And what did you do to try and call 911?
We crossed the street, ran to a house, knocked the door.
My door chimes started to ring. According to my recollection, a few minutes after midnight.
Alan Park, a limousine driver, was on his way to Rockingham to pick up the defendant to take him to the airport. He arrived at Rockingham at 10:25. Was that white Bronco there at the time you drove by at about 10:22?
I didn't see it.
And you were looking at that curb, were you not?
Yes.
At 10:45, Cato heard thumps on his wall. And where did that noise seem to be coming from?
From the back of the wall.
There was something not right about his testimony, of course. And so, again, all of this stuff leads to me having reasonable doubts as to what he was talking about or the testimony that he was giving.
Almost simultaneously, with seeing Cato in the side yard, he saw a person 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, wearing all dark clothing, African American, walk quickly up the driveway and into the front door entrance.
I saw a figure come into the entranceway.
Can you describe what he looked like?
All dark clothing, 6 foot, 200 pounds.
He got into the limousine and they left for the airport at approximately 11:15. They arrived at the airport at 11:30. And that small dark bag that the defendant insisted on putting in the car himself was never seen again after the defendant left for Chicago.
The problem for the state was the only way for him to have been able to do it, they needed a dog. They needed the dog's wailing to mark the beginning of that timeline, and they needed jurors to believe it. It's a huge challenge.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
regardless of the method used, they're both DNA testing. And the tests are really tests of exclusion. What does that mean? That means that when you conduct these tests, the effort is to exclude. You analyze the DNA and you see, can I exclude the suspect? Can I rule him out? Can the defendant be excluded? No matter how hard we tried, over and over, the samples were tested and retested and tested again. Over and over again, we asked ourselves, can the defendant be excluded? And over and over and over again, the answer was no.
The prosecution's DNA evidence was fantastic. You had OJ at the scene, victim's blood at OJ's house. The problem was explaining DNA to the jury. It wasn't current post-CSI television shows. It was back when you had to explain the process to jurors, and for a lot of jurors, it went right over their heads.
I remember in opening statements how Marcia Clark was making her case for how she's going to prove this murder case, and she mentioned, we're going to show you a trail of blood from the Blanco up the driveway up to the house.
No one will argue about what the cause of death was for Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown. These are the blood drops at the Bundy location at 875 South Bundy. This blood drop that you see here matches the defendant. Matches the defendant. Matches the defendant. Matches the defendant. Matches the defendant.
There was a lot of blood there, and in with the blood there was a lot of dog prints.
Paw prints?
Yes.
Did you see any shoe prints on that walkway?
Towards the front of the condominium, I observed some what appeared to be bloody shoe prints.
And which direction were those shoe prints going, sir?
They were going towards the rear of the condominium.
And a direction that would be from where the victims lay out towards the rear gate?
That's correct.
Did you see anything near those bloody shoe prints?
I saw 5 blood drops that led from the area of the bodies along the left side of the shoe prints out to the end of the walkway out on the apron of the driveway.
Now, the shoe prints that you saw were determined to have been made by a size 12 shoe. The defendant wears a size 12. The blood drops to the left of the bloody shoe prints, he was found to have had a cut to the middle finger of his left hand. When you got to the rear gate, did Detective Phillips point anything out to you?
Yes, pointed out what appeared to be a blood transfer or smear on the upper rung of the gate and what appeared to be 2 droplets of blood on the lower inside rung of the rear gate.
I found approximately 3 or 4 more drops between the rear end of the Bronco and the first one that I discovered. I followed it to the front door. At that point, other detectives were there and pointed out blood spots right in the foyer of the home to me.
And these blood drops are located inside the foyer at Mr. Simpson's home?
Inside the front door, yes, sir.
Now, Dr. Cotton, you have written in as to the estimations of how rare these matching characteristics are between the blood stain from the Rockingham foyer that matches Mr. Simpson as between approximately 1 in 170 million and 1 in 1.2 billion. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
I concluded that Mr. Simpson could not be excluded as a possible source of that sample.
What you have here is a trail of blood from Bundy Drive to Rockingham Avenue and into the defendant's very bedroom, linked by the defendant's white Ford Bronco.
I observed a spot on the Bronco on the driver's door, just above the door handle, that was a brownish red small dot.
I looked in from the passenger side of the vehicle and observed what appeared to be a blood smear along the passenger side of the console and what appeared to be blood on the inside of the driver's door of the vehicle.
2 people have been brutally murdered, and the evidence consistently will point to the guilt of only one person as their murderer.
My opinion is that Miss Brown was on the ground, face down, where this wound was inflicted. My opinion is that the head was extended backwards and the knife was used to cause this incise/stab wound from the left to the right.
Mr. Goldman was, at some point in the altercation, was immobilized in some manner like this, and
putting your knife in front of the neck and running the knife paddle, it would be like some kind of threatening cuts.
Blood evidence. Think about it. His blood is at the scene at Bundy. Now there's blood at Rockingham. There are the gloves.
I observed appeared to be a dark brown or black leather-appearing glove and appeared to be a blue knit cap in the dirt area near the feet of the victim Goldman.
The glove that you found at Bundy was that right or left-handed?
Left-handed.
When you saw the defendant on June the 13th, did you notice an injury to either hand?
Yes.
Which one?
The left hand.
I continued walking down the path, and when I got approximately 15 or 20 feet away, I saw a dark object. I continued to walk forward towards that object. At some point, I could tell that it was a glove.
Your Honor, at this time, the people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham.
That wasn't something that was planned, but the defense planned to goad him into it. They wanted him to do it, and he fell for it.
Christopher, you're okay, but you've got the cojones of a stud field mouse. He said, why would you say a thing like that to me? I said, because that glove won't fit OJ, and if you don't ask him to try it on, I will. He took the bait.
I was shocked at the incompetence of the prosecution in allowing him to try on the glove without making him try it on outside the presence of the jury earlier.
I was sitting in the front row, and I remember that he wasn't really tugging on it. It was sort of like an actor's portrayal of how you put on a glove.
Probably one of the biggest prosecutorial bumbles in history.
The gloves, by the way, did fit. No one can get those gloves on when you have latex underneath. She really tried hard. It would have been impossible.
And I couldn't believe that they actually went through this whole thing and they didn't know what the outcome was going to be, which to me was another thing that kind of turned the tide as to how I felt about guilt or innocence in the case.
The O.J. Simpson trial ends the week with the prosecution resting its case and the defense gearing up to prove O.J.'s innocence. Coming up, the Dream Team opens its case with dazzling speed.
I immediately started crying, and I had asked him, are you sure that it was Nicole? And he said yes, and I said, I was just shocked.
That's next on OJ25. I'm Roger Cossack.